History remembers conquerors, kings, and presidents, men who raised banners, declared authority, and demanded the obedience of thousands. But there's another kind of figure history doesn't know how to categorize. The man who never asked to lead, but people followed anyway. He didn't shout, didn't campaign, didn't bow. He simply moved with such self-possession that those around him couldn't ignore it. That's the Sigma. He doesn't rally teams. He doesn't recruit followers. He doesn't perform speeches for approval. If anything, he avoids the stage. Yet the paradox is this: he becomes a natural leader precisely because he isn't trying to be one. In a world where everyone fights to be noticed, the man who is content in silence becomes magnetic. In a culture where leaders often beg to be obeyed, the man who doesn't care if you follow him or not becomes irresistible. And in groups where power is usually taken by manipulation, the Sigma gains it by indifference. Not because he wanted it, but because the world doesn't know how to ignore authenticity. This isn't about charisma tricks, networking games, or the social climbing circus. It's about a kind of presence that bends the room without effort. The Sigma never auditioned for leadership. He simply became the gravitational force people orbit around. Let's break down 10 savage truths about why Sigma males end up leading, even when they'd rather be left alone. 1. His detachment makes him uncontrollable. Power belongs to the man no one can buy, beg, or bend. While most leaders are constantly negotiating with approval, terrified of losing votes, followers, or favor, the Sigma is detached. He doesn't care for applause, status, or ceremonial crowns. That detachment makes him immune to the manipulations that break ordinary men. Paradoxically, that's why others trust him. People know he won't sell out. He doesn't have a price tag on his soul. They may resent him, call him arrogant, or accuse him of being cold, but deep down, they know his detachment makes him the most reliable man in the room. When a crowd sees someone who isn't controlled by desperation for acceptance, they instinctively view him as stronger. He becomes a leader not by chasing, but by resisting the chase. 2. He forces people to rise to his level. The ground doesn't rise to meet you, you climb. The Sigma doesn't lower himself to make others comfortable. He won't dilute his standards, soften his voice, or shrink his vision to fit group mediocrity. And while most people resent this at first, it also pulls them upward. People hate being exposed as lazy or weak, but they also crave the gravity of someone who demands more. The Sigma never says, "Follow me." But by refusing to compromise, he forces others to either rise with him or be left behind. And when given the choice, most would rather rise. That's how he becomes the reluctant leader, by embodying the standard no one else had the courage to hold. 3. He doesn't need followers to feel powerful. A king without subjects is still a king if his crown is authenticity. Most men seek followers because without them, they feel small. Their leadership is really just a crutch. But the Sigma doesn't crave numbers. He could walk into a room, ignored by everyone, and still walk out with his spine straight. This independence makes his presence paradoxically magnetic, because people sense when a man's power is self-contained. They recognize when his worth isn't inflated by the crowd, and instinctively, they follow him because he doesn't need them. That's the irony. The men most desperate for followers are rarely followed. The man who doesn't care, he leads without effort. 4. He leads by example, not command. The loudest orders are silence carried out with conviction. Sigmas don't issue commands, they embody them. While others try to instruct with words, the Sigma instructs with action. His work ethic, his discipline, his refusal to fold under pressure, those things speak louder than any motivational speech. People watch, people imitate, and before long, without realizing it, they're following his blueprint. It's not leadership in the traditional sense, no raised flags, no chanting masses. It's leadership through lived truth. The Sigma doesn't try to inspire, he simply is. And that authenticity becomes contagious. 5. He refuses the spotlight, and that's why it finds him. Those who run from the stage often end up defining the play. Here's the irony. The Sigma never craves attention. He's often the one in the back of the room, observing silently while others fight for recognition. Yet because of that silence, People turn to him when chaos breaks out. Why? Because the man who isn't desperate to be seen is usually the only one seen clearly. In crisis, people realize the loudest voices are often the least reliable, and the quiet man, the Sigma, becomes the compass they didn't know they needed. Leadership finds him because he isn't looking for it. 6. He's trusted because he doesn't play games. When you have nothing to sell, people buy your truth. Politics, manipulation, flattery. These are the currencies of most men who chase leadership. But the Sigma refuses the theater. He won't play nice for points. He won't smile while plotting behind your back. He won't pretend loyalty for gain. That bluntness makes him polarizing. Some people hate him for it. But the ones who matter, the ones with sharp instincts, trust him because his words aren't currency. They're facts. People follow the Sigma because they know where he stands. In a world addicted to deception, clarity is power. 7. His silence makes him the storm. Still water cuts deeper than crashing waves. Most men avoid silence because it reminds them of how fragile they really are. They fear being alone with their thoughts, so they hide in crowds and noise. But the Sigma turns silence into a weapon. He doesn't just embrace solitude, he becomes sharper inside it. While others need approval to feel real, he builds an unshakable core in the quiet no one else can handle. That's why his presence rattles people. When chaos erupts, men who depended on the group lose their footing. They panic, look for direction, wait for consensus. But the Sigma doesn't need any of that. He moves with a clarity born from long nights of facing himself without distraction. To the weak, his silence feels like absence. But in reality, it's the kind of presence that can split a room in half. He doesn't shout, he doesn't beg for authority, and that's exactly why people fall in line. His silence doesn't just keep him steady, it makes him the storm others measure themselves against. 8. He doesn't fear losing people. You can't control a man who's willing to walk alone. Most men in power are slaves to their followers. They fear losing them, so they bend, beg, and compromise. But the Sigma is free because he's not afraid of being left with no one. This terrifies manipulators. They can't bribe him with belonging. They can't leash him with exile. And that untouchability makes him the strongest figure in the room. People follow strength, and true strength is revealed when a man has nothing to lose but himself. 9. He creates legacy, not dependence. A true leader builds people strong enough to not need him. The Sigma doesn't hoard followers like trophies. He doesn't count heads to inflate his ego or measure power by how many people orbit him. Instead, he leads by building others strong enough to stand without him. His goal isn't to keep people dependent, it's to forge men and women who can carry their own weight when he's not around. That's what makes him different. While other so-called leaders cling to followers like addicts to a fix, desperate to be needed, the Sigma would rather watch people outgrow him. He doesn't milk loyalty, he invests in strength. He doesn't demand you stay, he equips you to leave and thrive. And that's exactly why people follow him more fiercely, because deep down they know he isn't using them to build his throne. He's teaching them to build their own. 10. He doesn't lead for the present, he shapes the future. Leadership isn't about today's claps, it's about tomorrow's echoes. Most leaders are trapped in the now, chasing votes, likes, applause. But the Sigma plays the long game. He's not trying to win today's approval. He's thinking in years, decades, generations. That's why people follow him even reluctantly. Because deep down, they sense he isn't caught up in the circus of now. He's seeing something bigger, something they can't. And when vision meets conviction, leadership is inevitable. On a final note, the Sigma never asked to lead, and that's why he does. He doesn't fight for the crown. He doesn't rally armies. He doesn't beg to be followed. Yet the paradox repeats. People look to him anyway, because in a world of clowns chasing thrones, the man who doesn't care about power becomes the most powerful of all. The Sigma isn't trying to be your leader, but if you're watching closely, you'll probably end up following him anyway.